Okay, dobré odpoledne, dámy a pánové. Dovolte vás uvítat na veřejné přednášce Učené společnosti, kde bude hovořit profesorka Adélia Sequeira z Institutu Superior Técnico z Univerzity Lisbon o kardiovaskulárních problémech s aplikací v klinických studiích. Já přejdu teď k angličtině. So let me introduce Professor Adélia Sequeira. She is full professor of mathematics in IST, it means Instituto Superior Técnico, in University of Lisbon in Portugal. And she is director of Research Center on Computation and Stochastic Mathematics in the last 4 years. She received her doctoral degree in numerical analysis in 1981 at École Polytechnique in Paris, in France, and second doctoral degree in mathematics in 1985 at Faculty of Science of University of Lisbon. In January 2001, she received her habilitation in applied mathematics and numerical analysis. And in 2018, she was elected as a corresponding member of Lisbon Academy of Science. In 2019, she was selected as a Women in Science by Portuguese Agency of Science and Technology. Currently, her research is, our research interested are in area of cardiovascular mathematical modeling and simulation of closely connected problem of clinical relevance associated with vascular disease, patient-specific cerebral aneurysm, progression, biomechanical, biochemical attention in blood vessels with application of thrombosis and other processes, and she's also interested in mathematical and computation fluid dynamics, particularly focusing on viscoelastic, non-Newtonian fluid, and Rheology and hemodynamic studies. And today she will speak about cardiovascular mathematics with application to some clinical studies. So, please, Adélia.
Okay. So. Thank you very much for Professor Nechasova for this kind invitation to this to give a lecture in this distinguished Learned Society of the Czech Republic. It's for me a great honor to give this lecture here. I know that the audience is quite heterogeneous, but I think that cardiovascular diseases is a subject that is interesting for everybody because we all have problems of that sooner or later. And cardiovascular diseases are, in fact, the ones that are the most serious and major causes of death in the developed countries around the world. And the costs and overall status of healthcare are enormous. And so what can mathematics do for that? What can mathematicians do for that? This is my job, and it's the job of many mathematicians, bioengineers, and in fact, this is a topic, interdisciplinary topic that involves many people, because this cannot be done by a single group. This is not done only by mathematicians, because it involves mathematicians, bioengineers, so computer scientists in collaboration with medical doctors. And it's a very, very challenging topic because we feel that we are somehow trying to collaborate with the medical doctors to help them to, let's say, to avoid some surgery or to contribute to some diagnosis of some disease, and so through the mathematical modeling and the numerical simulations. And this is a topic that I have been working on in the last 20 years, and I think this will be forever my topic. I have been working in other topics, in particular mathematical and numerical fluid dynamics, and this is closely related. And this topic has been strongly developed in the last decades, mainly due to the supported by the medical investigation, and this is due by the improvement in the high performance of computing hardware, but it's mainly due to the development of more accurate mathematical modeling and to the numerical techniques that have been developed along these last years. So, now the main topics, I've been working with several, supported by several projects that I mentioned here, with many collaborators. I just mentioned some of them here in different subjects, in particular in blood rheology, blood coagulation modeling and simulations, image-based modeling of blood flows in cerebral aneurysms, mathematical modeling and simulations of inflammation and atherosclerosis, arthropathies in bicuspid aortic valve patients, mathematical and computational modeling of drug dissolution applied to coronary stents, and other issues, other topics, in collaboration with medical doctors. It depends on the medical doctors which the kind of problems they ask us to solve. Then we involve students and postdocs and PhD students, master students, and so on, and we work with them. And here I underline this in green, this image-based modeling of blood flows in cerebral aneurysms, because I will focus on that at the end of my talk as the medical application. Otherwise, I will give a general talk, and so I apologize if I will show some equations, because I know that part of the audience, or most of the audience, are not mathematicians, but somehow we need to show some equations, but I will pass them very quickly, and so you will see that this will not be very boring, since I will show some movies and some something which is interesting, and those which are more boring I will pass quickly. Okay, so cardiovascular diseases, I already said that leading cause of death in developed countries. Modeling and simulations, with the modeling and simulations, we try to understand these diseases to optimize surgical procedures and design medical devices. The main goal is to do surgery assisted by computers. In fact, we are not yet at that point, but this is the main goal. So among the cardiovascular diseases, as I mentioned, is atherosclerosis. Everybody knows what is atherosclerosis. Is in fact the accumulation of fatty material in the wall of the vessel. This is fibrous elements and calcium in the intima of the arteries. I will talk a bit later about the composition of the arteries. So the blood is flowing in the lumen, and this is the arterial wall, which is composed by several layers. And at the level of the intima, there is an accumulation of essentially of fatty material, a strong concentration of LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol. And this is due to the high blood pressure, smoking, and other factors, congenital factors as well, pancreatic problems, and so. And the consequences are the narrowing vessel, the vessel narrowing, as you can see here, and as you can see here. And the bad consequences is heart attack and stroke. So the blood cannot flow normally, and so the problem is that we can have an heart attack. And how can the medical solve this problem? By introducing, for instance, a stent or a bypass, but a stent is the usual procedure, to enlarge the vessel. And in order to do that, there are different techniques, and there is people who is specialized on stents, and so all the techniques of the interaction between the stents and the vessel wall and so on. And the problem is that when you introduce something in the blood flow, some strange material, immediately a component of the blood, the platelets, they activate and they can form blood clots, and the blood can coagulate, form blood clots, and the clots can go to the brain, and so it's necessary to take some medication to avoid the formation of clots. So this introduction of stents is interesting, but it is necessary to be cautious and so that the medical doctors know how to do. And the stents usually they are biodegradable, and also they are we use drug-eluting stents. I have been working with some collaborators on drug-eluting stents, because otherwise the material has a tendency to come back to the previous form, and so the idea is to enlarge the vessel. But if there is some drug in the stent, this drug is continuously delivered, so the vessel can continue to be enlarged and not to recover the previous form. So the idea is to enlarge the vessel and to keep it as longer as possible, larger as possible. So the other cardiovascular disease, and this one I will talk about later, are the aneurysms, which is a gradual dilation of the arterial segments. So the vessel stretches and becomes thinner, and the problem is the rupture. There is no problem if the vessel enlarged, but the problem, there is a problem because it can constrain the other organs. But in any case, the main problem is the rupture. This is the picture showing a fusiform aneurysm, which is a vascular aneurysm in the aorta, and this is a cerebral aneurysm. I will talk about cerebral aneurysms later, which is a saccular, as a form of a balloon. This can be treated by clipping or oiling and so on. I will talk about later, or then just by surgery. When it's possible. Otherwise, sometimes it's too late and there is rupture and the patient can die. And so when it's clipped or when it is treated, it's necessary to put a stent also here to, let me go back to the previous. So when you introduce a stent, when it's clipped, you need to introduce a stent to enlarge this parent vessel in order to establish the circulation. Okay. So now this is a picture here that where I mentioned the arthropathy in the valve patient. Valve patient is bicuspid aortic valve. Bicuspid aortic valve patients, so it's patients who have, instead of 3 valves, they have 2 valves. They are born like that. This is a collaboration with the pediatric service, with the service in a pediatric hospital in Portugal. And in fact, the problem is for patients who are children who are born with this disease. The aorta becomes dilated. There is the coarctation and deformation of the aorta, and they have problems during all their life, and especially, in particular, they need to have surgeries, and not only one surgery, but several surgeries along their life. And so we have been working, this is an old slide, but we have been working on this subject, and we have published some papers on this topic as well. Okay, now blood is the main topic here. So blood, hemodynamics is the dynamics of blood, and the hemodynamics is the main issue. So is we know that the main indicator of atherosclerosis or the formation of the growth of and rupture of aneurysms is the wall shear stress. And wall shear stress, which is the tangential component of the traction on the wall, is not obtained directly from the equations. You will see the equations later. So this is the expression of the wall shear stress, but it's not obtained directly from the equations. It's obtained after solving the equations. And the medical doctors cannot see the wall shear stress, cannot obtain the wall shear stress. They can obtain the velocity of the blood, the pressure of the blood. They can do some measurements, but not the wall shear stress. So it's important to do the numerical simulations and to give them some indications of some. There are some indicators that can help them in some decisions. And so, which are the difficulties in modeling blood flow? Blood is a very complex fluid, and the study of blood rheology is one topic. It's quite complex. I've been working on that very, very hardly, and wrote several papers and chapters and so about this. Then there is, but not only blood is important, there is the interaction with the vessel walls. And the other problem is the geometry of the circulatory system, which is very complex. And we have vessels that are curved, that we have bifurcations, we have vessels of different dimensions. And we also know that the circulatory system forms a closed system where if we do 3D flow, here is the carotid bifurcations, where representing a simulation of carotid bifurcation, 3D simulation. If we do 3D simulations in the certain region of interest, these 3D simulations are local, but they have an influence on the global dynamics. So the local flow dynamics has an important role in the systemic circulation and vice versa. So this is a closed system, and this should be taken into account. Okay. So this is a pipeline where you can see how to work in this topic. In fact, you know, I forgot to mention, but so I forgot. Let's say I said already at the beginning that this is a subject that involves many people, and there are many groups around the world working in this field, and many specialized groups around the world working in this field. And this is a field where there are always open problems, because the solution, and many of the problems are, most of the problems are not yet solved. So we start with the patient data, real data. We pass to, this is just to illustrate, you know, so we pass from the real data to the image because we want to do some simulations. So we need to have image, and this is given by the medical doctors. They can give us images from their computers. And then, but in order to treat those images from the mathematical point of view, we need to reconstruct the images, to reconstruct the geometries with appropriate methods of segmentation and smoothness and so on. And then to generate meshes in order to apply some numerical methods. And we use appropriate mathematical models. And the problem is that the mathematical models usually are partial differential equations or ordinary differential equations, but they cannot be solved exactly, and we need numerical approximations. And in order to solve them, so we need appropriate numerical methods. And what the medical doctors want to see is not a table with values. So we need to validate our methods, and we need to show them the numerical simulation. We need to show images which are credible, so that they need to see something that they trust and they are expecting, and they should give more information than what they have from the images they get directly from their computers. And so this is the post-processing visualization, and then the clinical interpretation. So this corresponds to the dialogue with the medical doctors, and then the feedback. So it means, the feedback means that if we are not satisfied with the results, or if the medical doctors are not satisfied with the results, we should go back and restart again. So this is quite complex, and it's this pipeline. Okay. So blood rheology. Why did I talk about blood rheology? We know that we have different kinds of vessels. We have the main vessel, which is the aorta, and the artery, and the vena cava. So in the aorta, we can consider blood as composition, a simple composition, but you know, in blood there are the red blood cells and the plasma. The red blood cells are the erythrocytes, or so the blood cells are the red blood cells or erythrocytes, the white blood cells, leukocytes or leukocytes, and platelets. And then the plasma. The erythrocytes, red blood cells, are about 40 or 45%, and about 1% is formed by the percentage of leukocytes together with platelets. So the most important components of blood that give the behavior of blood as a non-Newtonian fluid are the red blood cells. They are represented here as a biconcave discs, and these are the white blood cells, and these are the platelets. So this is a cartoon. Okay, the red blood cells, they aggregate and they deform. They deform under shear stress, and up to the formation of they deform, and they can form ellipsoids. So the viscosity of blood is not constant. The viscosity of blood decreases with shear rate. So for instance, the water has constant viscosity, but blood has not a constant viscosity. So we call it shear thinning viscosity. But for instance, in the artery, so the aorta, which is very large compared to the size of the red blood cells and the other cells, we can neglect the composition of blood and think that and give a simple, consider a simpler model for the blood and consider blood as a Newtonian fluid. And I will talk later about these models. But in fact, blood is non-Newtonian. But for instance, in the capillaries, this is a capillary. The red blood cells, they need to deform and so on to enter from capillary to a venule. They need to deform to enter in the venule, and we cannot give the same model in the capillaries or in the larger vessel. Essentially, we have models for capillaries, we have models for medium-sized vessels, and we have models for large vessels. In the very small vessels, we should consider models as particles in flow. In the medium vessels and large vessels, we can consider models, homogeneous models for blood, non-Newtonian in the medium size and Newtonian in the large size. In the small vessels, the red blood cells, they move toward the central part of the vessels, and the blood viscosity shifts toward plasma viscosity, which is much lower. So there is a layer here with no cells, and the viscosity decreases. This is called the Farrell's-Lindquist effect. Okay, so other effects, other non-Newtonian effects is the viscoelasticity, non-linear creeping, stress relaxation, normal stress effects. For those of you who know about this, these are important non-Newtonian effects, and we can model blood taking into account some of these effects, but these viscoelastic effects are only substantial at very low shear rates. In any case, and doing some oscillatory and pulsatile flow analysis, they can be experimentally measured. In any case, there are models that take into account this nonlinear viscoelasticity, and they are used to model blood. So if you look to some papers or books about blood rheology, you can see different kinds of models as shear sealing or linear and non-linear viscoelastic models. Blood can also exhibit other non-Newtonian characteristics. As I say here, thixotropy means that there is a finite time required to break down the rouleau. So it's the shear sealing depending on time. It's called thixotropy. And the yield stress, it's like toothpaste. Toothpaste paste is a yield stress flow. So it takes time to flow only by exerting a certain tension on the a certain shear on the stress on the flow. It starts to flow, and it's the same here. But of course, these experiments with blood, they should be done very carefully at the lab under some conditions. Some experiments show that blood can resist shear, behaving like a solid rigidly until a critical level of stress is reached. This is called the yield stress. And then it starts flowing like a fluid. It's called the yield stress fluid. Okay. This is a table that it's a classical table from 91. We work nowadays with other values, but I show this here because this is the classical one of shear thinning blood flow models with experimental parameters by curve fitting to parameters, curve fitting to models. So these models are different kinds of shear thinning models, and these are the corresponding parameters. In order to do some numerical simulations, we need to have parameters. Of course, we cannot do these with some constants. We need to give values to these constants. And these are, we can choose one of these models and then work with this. Of course, if we are in the lab and we work with some hematologist who gives us a realistic model, realistic values for our model, it's much better than to use these values that are found in the literature. Okay, these are something that I have written, but you can find much more written by other people on the web. You can find many things. So this is a book that I will show you the cover page at the end. And then some chapters written in 2008 and 2009 about blood rheology. Now, I said that I will show some equations. Here they are. For blood, generalized Newtonian fluids are the fluid equations for shear thinning fluid. Since blood is a shear thinning fluid, and I will neglect now the viscoelasticity of blood, I will consider only shear thinning. So these are the equations for the shear thinning fluid, where the stress is not directly proportional to the deformation. Oh, sorry. Go back to the symmetric part of the velocity gradient, but this is the viscosity, but it's dependent on the shear rate. The shear rate is given by this expression here. And so we can choose one of the previous models, and in these simulations that I will show here, I don't know if I show here, in fact, but in fact, in some of the simulations I have done, let's do it, let's explain like that. I have used this shear thinning viscosity Carro model, but I have done also simulations with the Cross model and with the Carro-Yasuda model, and essentially they don't give, the results are not very different because we choose the appropriate parameters. So the difference between these and the Navier-Stokes equations, which are the equations for the aorta, for instance, the Newtonian fluids, is that instead of having mu depending on the gamma dot, we have just mu constant, viscosity is constant. Okay, and here it's not constant. Otherwise, the equations are the same. U is the velocity, P is the pressure, and tau is the stress tensor, and rho is the density of the blood that we consider it's approximately equal to 1 point something. Okay. Now, we cannot only talk about blood, we should talk about interactions with the wall, because blood is flowing in the vessel. This is the lumen, and this is the vessel wall that is formed by several layers. If we want to study atherosclerosis, for instance, we should work at the level of the intima, because the biochemical reactions, they happen in the intima, and so the interactions between the lumen, the blood flow in the lumen and the intima should be taken into account. But if we want to to talk about mechanical interaction, and then we neglect the other layers, or then we choose a simpler. We can choose a simpler model for the wall, and this is what I will show you here, just to simplify. But in fact, there are very complex models for the wall. But you can imagine that in order to do numerical simulations, if we consider a complex model for the wall, a complex model for the fluid, and then we couple both models, then we have very complex simulations. So we should try to simplify as much as possible, just to see if, here it was just to see if they interact, the fluid and the structure. And so this is the model for the fluid, and this is a nonlinear hyperelastic model for the wall. Eta is the wall displacement, and rho W is the density of the wall, and this sigma is the stress on the wall. And this zero is because this is written in a Lagrangian framework, a Lagrangian referential, and while the equations for the fluid are written in Eulerian frame. So here we need to couple the fluid equations with the vessel equations, and in order to couple that, we need to establish to impose some interface conditions, which are velocity, continuity of the velocity on the wall, and continuity of the stresses on the wall, and plus initial and boundary conditions. Okay, otherwise it doesn't work. And since one is written in Eulerian, the other is in Lagrangian, then we need to modify here the interface conditions. Here, these Navier-Stokes, so generalized Navier-Stokes, generalized Newtonian, are modified because we have used, in order to do this coupling, we have used ALE, or arbitrary Lagrangian Eulerian framework, to couple the fluid and the structure. There are other possibilities of coupling. The problem of coupling fluid and structure is that the wall is moving. The wall is moving, and when we do the numerical simulations, we need to remesh at each time step. If we don't, and instead of doing that, we introduce an arbitrary map that modifies the equations, and this arbitrary map at the end, so that this is not very simple to arrive to this. This is the final step. The final step is to introduce here in the generalized Newtonian equations this W, which is just a domain velocity, the velocity of the domain. So, and then if we introduce here the velocity of the domain, it's just like everything is fixed. But so, of course, I'm just, I'm not giving any detail at all here at this level, just to show you. And this is the interface conditions that we need to use, some transformation, Fiala transformation in order to have a compatibility here. Okay, now, what are we doing here? We are coupling fluid and structure, and blood and deformation of the vessel wall, and in fact, this slide is quite old, and there are more contributions at this level of the well-posedness, and more contributions at the level of the numerical algorithms than those that I have written here, because many people has been working on this problem, and there are still open problems at the level of coupling fluid and structure. This coupling, it is partitioned coupling. It's done at the level of from the normal stress, then we calculate we calculate for the fluid, and then we calculate we obtain the normal stress, and then we calculate for the structure, and then we obtain the displacement, and then we replace the domain, and so this is working. So in our simulations, we have used some, I will pass very quickly, we have used some strategy, some numerical strategy in order to work with this, some numerical strategy. There are two different ways of doing this implementation, this so-called monolithic approach and partitioned approach. What is the advantage of the partitioned approach? Partitioned approach is that we can take advantage of knowing the best solvers for the fluid, knowing the best solver for the structure, and then coupling them. But there is a problem of the so-called added mass effect, that the result of that is instabilities, and it's necessary very small time steps in order to have convergence of the algorithms. And instead of doing that, and it's necessary a very strong coupling in order to have convergence, which imposes many sub-iterations per time step. Instead of doing that, it's possible to restructure the system and to use a monolithic approach, which doesn't take advantage of the two solvers. But there is no stability issues, but this gives rise to a used system and to develop a new solver. So there is advantage and disadvantage. Nowadays, both of them are used, and using parallel computers parallel solvers, and the new techniques that exist nowadays, we are using the partitioned approach. So, in fact, when this technique started, we started with partitioned approach, then we come back to, we use monolithic, and nowadays we came back to the partitioned approach, which is possible to do due to the development of the technology and the new technique, the new numerical techniques. Now, the geometrical multiscale. What I'm doing here, we are giving techniques for 3D simulations. But so this means that this is nothing compared to the whole circulatory system. This means that we are focused in a region of interest where we can do the 3D numerical simulations. And but this is in a region of a bifurcation, or in a region of a stenosis, and so on. And we know that this has an influence in the rest of the circulatory system. And so it's necessary to use this in regions of interest, but to couple with network models that include peripheral impedances to account for global effects. So this local fluid dynamics has an influence on the global fluid dynamics. And this is called the geometrical multiscale that I show here. So you see, we use 3D models for very detailed, very complex simulations. Then they are computational, very costly. Then we can reduce to 1D models that the models are simpler, but of course they only give values which are not so, not the same level of precision. They give the evolution of mean pressure and flux in arteries system. It's a system of hyperbolic equations, and the computational cost is lower. And then for the rest of the circulation, it's possible to consider a system of ordinary differential equations that gives the evolution in time of mean pressure and flux in wide compartments. So for the whole circulatory system, we can consider the 0D. In fact, the study of the blood flow in the circulatory system started with 0D models, then it passed to 1D models, and only later to 3D models with the evolution of the technology and the numerical methods and the computers and the simulations and so on. So because so it was not possible to do 3D simulations several years ago. It was not possible as we do now. 1D model, just to show you what is a 1D model, it's just by integrating the 3D model on a section of, we consider, for instance, blood flow in a cylinder, and we consider the cylinder, we cut a section, a circular section, and then we integrate the model over that section, imposing certain conditions, and then we obtain this model where the unknowns are the area, the flux, and the mean pressure. Then we obtain 3 unknowns, and we have 2 equations, and then we need to impose another relation between the pressure and the mean pressure and the area by an ad hoc algebraic equation like this. So this is called a hyperbolic model. So this is usually the 1D model. And then we need to couple the fluid structure interaction 3D with the 1D model, 3D with 1D model by imposing this is 1D, this is the 3D, and then we fix the flux on the 3D model and the normal stress on the 1D model, or the opposite, the normal stress on the 1D model and the flux on the normal stress on the 3D, and no, it's okay. The flux on the 3D and normal stress on the 1D, like I said. But so this is the coupling strategy. So the coupling strategy, it's quite difficult in to do that in the commercial software, because commercial software is not adapted to introduce coupling of it's prepared essentially for 3D models or 2D models. If we want to couple with 1D, it's more complex, and so instead of doing that, we can impose, for instance, boundary conditions that absorb reflections. In fact, I want to show you the problem of coupling and why we introduce the absorbing boundary conditions in the coupling. Here you can see, for instance, on the left, you can see a model, a 3D model in a cylindrical artery, and on the right, a 3D, 1D coupled model. What is the effect of the 3D, 1D? From one side, the 3D, 1D is to allow, so this is the pressure pulse, this represents the pressure pulse. The 3D, 1D represents the rest of the circulation, let's say. But on the other hand, if we don't do that, then we have spurious reflections. So the blood arrives here and goes back. And this is not physiological. And so the problem is that to avoid this coupling and to represent the coupling without coupling, we introduce here some boundary conditions which are called artificial boundary conditions that have the same effect of coupling with 1D. These are called absorbing boundary conditions. And we have done that. This is interesting. And also it's possible to couple with 0D models, which are kind of resistance that we impose at the boundary of the vessel. So that's why, so let me go back here. So it allows to integrate 3D models, lower 1D models, acts as a physiological boundary conditions. This is the advantage. So there are also disadvantages, and it's maybe impossible or non-trivial to implement in many widely used commercial CFD codes, as I said, but we can impose a condition that is artificial absorbing boundary condition, or then coupling with Castle, for instance, 0D model. Okay, now another movie that I have here to show you, which is of course amplified, very amplified, is 3D 1D of the velocity field. You can see the streamlines. This is amplified. Of course, our vessels do not move like that, otherwise we would be destroyed. But this is to show you the fluid structure interaction, and there is spurious reflections. You see here that it's no, there are no spurious reflections. It is 3D 1D. So we can still see some reflections, but not much. We would see much more if there would be no 1D 1D coupling. The coupling is not shown, but there are absorbing boundary conditions, or then coupling with the Castle model. Okay. Now, 0D model, just because I was talking about 0D model. 0D model is called the lumped parameters model, represented by a set of a system of linear ODEs. And there is an analogy between fluid dynamics and it's essentially an electric circuit where the pressure represents the voltage, flow rate is current, blood viscosity is resistance, blood inertia is inductance, well, compliance is capacitance. So we have different kinds of circuits of the type RLC. They model large arteries. RC model the capillary bed. And they, with this kind of circuits, we can model the whole circulatory system. And you can see here how it's a full geometric multi-scale model. So this coupling, 0D, 1D, 2D, or 3D coupling auto model, and this is the 3D or 2D. Okay. Now, I still have time, I think, so for the application to the medical aneurysm. Okay. So I will be very quick. This is the, let's say, the most important part of my talk. The medical application to the cerebral aneurysms, because everybody, I think, is concerned with these medical problems, and how can computational fluid dynamics help in the prognosis and therapy planning. And so the cerebral aneurysms, they appear in the so-called polygon or of Willis, polygon of Willis, and they are found in bifurcations or curved curved segments. A circle, it's also called circus or polygon of aneurysm. And the problem is that if they there is rupture, because in the there is no rupture, there is not a big problem, but they are the most common cause of hemorrhagic strokes. And the mechanism behind development, growth, and rupture of intracranial aneurysms is still not well understood. And it's important to collaborate in this field because we can give through the numerical simulations some input to the medical doctors to predict the growing of aneurysms, because there is the observation of the aneurysms is done not systematically by medical doctors. Only when there are some symptoms, they observe the patient, because it's quite invasive. It's an angiography that it's invasive, and they only do it if there is really if the patient has a very strong headache, or if there is some other problems. So causes of this, it's asymmetry, some cerebral atherosclerosis, hypertension. So the vessels are weaker, and they can rupture, and there is a non-uniform distribution. So as I said, they appear in the apex of bifurcation and outer bands of curved elements. For instance, this lady here, the medical doctors could see that she could not open this high and could open much more this one. And she had, in fact, a big aneurysm that was not ruptured yet, and he could treat her. This was given by a neuroradiologist, this picture. So how do they treat? I already showed this picture. If the aneurysm has a neck like this, it can be clipped, or then it can be coiled also. If it's clipped or coiled, a stent should be introduced. Otherwise, the neurosurgeons, they just cut it. If they arrive on time, let's say, because most of the times the aneurysms are already ruptured and the patient dies. This is the big problem here. So this is also some picture where you can see the aneurysms, the cerebral vasculature, and where the aneurysms are located. And usually when there is one aneurysm, it's not only one, there is more than one. And this is, here in this table, you can see that this is a multifactorial problem. So for the aneurysms, it's important to think about initiation, growth, and then stabilization and rupture. And there are several factors: biomechanics, wall stress, so growth and remodeling, the clinical, genetics, gender, age, smoking, and so on, perianeurysmal environment, and hemodynamics. We are more concerned here with hemodynamics. And this is quite controversial, the study here, and to obtain the values of the wall shear stress, because either the low or the high wall shear stress can give indications of rupture, because the low wall shear stress is an indicator of endothelial dysfunction, and then remodeling and intimal thickening, and high wall shear stress is an indicator of wall weakness. So it means that if either the low values of wall shear stress or high values of wall shear stress can indicate that the aneurysm can rupture. So it's not enough to study the wall shear stress, but other parameters derived from the wall shear stress, and also others like the study of the mechanics of the wall itself. So this is the cartoon. So we start with the image, we obtain, we do the reconstruction or image processing, reconstruction of the image, mesh generation, flow visualization, of course, starting with that and using appropriate models for the blood flow and coupling with the structure or not. It depends if we want to do structure interaction or not. So here you can see the rotational, this is given by the medical doctors, the rotational angiography, where we can see the aneurysm, where it is located, and then after seeing the aneurysm, then we do some projections and take the aneurysm, the images that we want. And then we do the segmentation of the image using appropriate methods, and use steady and unsteady inflow flux profiles versus time, so using the appropriate inflow conditions. And then this is important as well, because so we are interested in studying, for instance, this aneurysm, and we can isolate the aneurysm itself or then consider also the branches. So this is the parent vessel, but there are also the branches, and the circulation in the branches is important. But we can neglect the branches by considering the coupling with 1D models. So here, for instance, we don't have the branches, but it's like if we have the branches, because we introduce here the appropriate boundary conditions. So we introduce here the boundary conditions. So the no slip boundary conditions, or traction-free, or coupling with 1D model, or coupling with a 0D resistance model, and so on. Okay. Now, we have used the Python to do the simulations and some software which is free on the web. So automatic and manual segmentations. I think Snap for the segmentations, MeshLab for surface smoothing suitable for simulations, Mesh Mixer for the geometry manipulations, and Gmesh for the mesh 3D finite element mesh generator. And we obtained some results that I show you very quickly here. So here we have these three, I have some kinds of different, because you can see that there are different kinds of aneurysms. This one has two vessels here, and the aneurysm has this form. So this is an aneurysm that could not be clipped, for instance. So this is the peak of the systole, the mid-diastole, and the end of diastole. And it represents the cardiac cycle at the inflow section. And the simulations have been done. We have obtained 3 cardiac cycles, and they were computed using 800 time steps per cycle. The results were obtained during the 3rd cycle, and here you can see the streamlines and the velocity. So the red represents higher velocity magnitude, and the same in the other. I have other figures with the same. That I will not comment. So this is for the same aneurysm. In the top row, we have also for the peak of the systole and mid-diastole and end of diastole, we have the velocity profile, and this is scaled and colored according to the velocity magnitude, and this is the distribution, the wall stress distribution. This is the same, but for another aneurysm, a different one. So the same, the streamlines, velocity streamlines for a different one. This is again for the same, another velocity profile and velocity magnitude, and so the wall stress distribution. Another aneurysm. And okay, and the same for the previous one, as you can see, the velocity magnitude, the velocity profile, and then the wall stress distribution. And this is another one. So this is just to show you that there are different kinds of aneurysms. Bad ones, some are bad ones, and some correspond to some of them have been ruptured and others not. And so there are other hemodynamical indicators, as I have said, that can be obtained from the wall shear stress. This is, for instance, the time average wall shear stress that is obtained from this expression, the relative residence time from this expression, or the OSI, oscillatory shear index, where the OSI can, this allows to identify regions subjected to highly oscillating wall shear stress. So this varies between 0 and 1/2. 0, there is no oscillation, and 1/2, there is indicates oscillation during the pulsatile cycle. Okay, now some movies just to at the end of for the velocity vector field, velocity profile. So the wall shear stress. So blue is always values which are lower, and red represents higher values. For another aneurysm, the velocity profile. So you can see that the velocity is not very high here, it's higher there. Sometimes when this would not rupture, this one, when there is some jets of fluid, it's an indication of possible rupture. And this is the wall shear stress, which is also low in the whole bulk of the aneurysm. And that's all. And so this is the book I talked about, the CEMAT, where we talk about blood flow and some chapters about other issues. And thank you very much for your attention. I think I took more time than, but I also started a little later. I'm always doing like that. I'm sorry for that.
Okay, so thank you very much for your very nice and interesting talk. So, are there some questions or remarks? Yes, just 1 minute.
Thank you very much for your lecture, which was very interesting for me, because I am a mathematical statistician, and I work in the Department of Probability and Statistics, and our PhD students sometimes work also in the Institute of Public Health. And one student was dealing also with some kind of nonlinear regression, modeling the flow of blood, and there was an experiment, and the goal of the experiment was to find the speed of flow of a drug against asthmatics in the children vessels. So how fast is the effect of this drug after application?
Sorry, there was a telephone. I'm sorry, wait a minute.
silent for a moment.
Can you repeat, please? Because so I had a phone call. Sorry.
This special experiment, it was in the Institute of Public Health.
Yes, yes.
The colleagues were interested in the speed, how fast is the extension of a drug against the blood, against asthmatics in the vessels of children, boys and girls, and they have many data. And so their model was finally a mixture of exponentials, because it was, of course, the model was based on the differential equations with several parameters, and typically the result is the exponential, so there was a mixture of exponentials, and so the regression function was such a mixture of exponential with some covariates. And then we tried to find this velocity, and also we tried to test whether this extension was faster in the blood of girls against the boys, etc. So it was very interesting, but I don't know whether the model was okay. We didn't treat any correctness of the model. We just use this model and just make our statistical mathematics based on this.
No, it's very interesting, the statistics and to have data. You know, I never studied that topic, in fact. But did you write some paper on that? Do you have some paper on that?
Yes, it was, in fact, it was a thesis. It was a PhD thesis of the student, but it's a long time ago. Maybe nowadays models are more modern. But I can send you the paper just to see how did we consider it.
I would like, yes, I never studied that topic, but in fact, I would like to, we can discuss on that. It would be interesting. Yeah. No, I never studied that. But in fact, the behavior of men and women, boys and girls, it's different in many diseases. So, of course, the statistical data is extremely important on that, because only by doing statistics and obtaining data you can realize that you know. So when we use the models, we use, for instance, patient-specific data. Patient-specific data means for a certain patient. And then we cannot extrapolate for everybody because it's just for that patient. But so we know that the statistic is extremely important for any kind of disease. And if we want to decide the prevalence of some disease in men or women of a certain age, or girls and boys of a certain age, and so of course we need statistics. Of course, this is extremely important. Yeah. No, I would like to have that paper because I never worked on.
So I'm very happy to send it. I'll ask Sharka for the address. Yes.
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Okay. So, are there some other questions? Or yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. Towards the end, you were showing these numerical simulations, and my question is very practical. If I was a doctor, right, and you showed these simulations, so how would I change my procedure based on the data you provided? I mean, what is the added value that the doctors have that they can, I don't know, treat the patient better, do a more precise surgery, or so? Yeah, I would like to understand that.
No, through these simulations, I didn't want to. This is not the simulations I have shown to the doctor, you know. So so this is the simulations I prepared to show here. For the doctor, we have studied, in fact, several cases that they, in fact, to work in this field is quite difficult because they give us many images, and then in order to treat these images, some of them are not good enough in order to be segmented, in order to be treatable from the mathematical point of view. So, and then we had, for instance, 150 and we took only 10. And with 10, we could not derive sufficient results to arrive to some conclusions. And, but we obtained somehow some results, and then we provide some images saying, for instance, for instance, this patient, we could predict these. That this aneurysm could rupture, or there is a flow in a jet in this direction, and that the rupture could be observed sooner or later. But the study that we have done was with aneurysm that we knew already the result, because it was given by a surgeon who treated the patients. Some of them were already ruptured, and others were not ruptured and were treated, and we knew already the results. And we did also a study of the wall of the wall of the aneurysm, and took into account some parameters that we considered in the simulations in order to complete our results. Because as I said, so what I have shown you is that all the aneurysms I have in these movies, which were shown just to illustrate, we don't see jets and we don't see very high wall shear stress, because this didn't rupture. These aneurysms didn't rupture. They are good aneurysms, let's say, but good ones. But there are others which have a bad form and have some angles and sometimes, you know, this is not predictable. And as I said, the wall shear stress doesn't indicate much, because the high wall shear stress or low wall shear stress is quite controversial, because one is an indicator of one can indicate that the consequence is rupture or non-rupture. The other indicates non-rupture. So, but in this case, in fact, what I have shown is something that we knew already the results. You know?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
It was not to arrive to some conclusion. From these pictures, you could not see anything.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so are there some other questions? If not, there is some question from public, from online. This is from Arna Proy, by the way, my postdoc. And he's asking you about what kind of junction condition we need to assume if we consider a network type model. So about this junction condition.
So what I have considered is to couple. I think I have shown the slides. To couple the stress, the stress and so the stress from the 1D and the 3D model. The stress from the two sides, the reduced model and the 3D model.
Okay, so Thank you so much. So if there are no any other questions or remarks, so thank you really very much. We really appreciate it. It was fantastic lecture, so thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you and goodbye to Lisbon. And
okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sorry, please. A děkujeme všem posluchačům a děkujeme všem za pozornost a za výdrž a doufám, že se uvidíme v září zase na nějaké krásné přednášce. Naschledanou.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.